what should the coefficients for the new matrix X be?
1.
Here.
1. X.
How about the second equation? And at the bottom here is a 1, and at the bottom here is X. Cap in first. And this guy is 1. Okay? So our new X is this. Is there an unknown here? No. It's good. So this is my new X that includes the bias term. And we need the bias term because in neural networks we want the most general linear relationship between the input and the output. And that means you have to include the bias term. And you're going to see that later when I'm going to go through the details of neural networks. If we don't do that, we're going to assume our line goes to the origin, and that's one of the reasons why we do the demeaning. We'd like to help our case a little bit, because our clouds of points, the best fit lines don't go through the origin. But when you demean them, your input data, the clouds of points, it's almost like you're saying it does go, the best fit line will go through the origin, but it's not, maybe not true. So this helps your case quite a bit. Data overfitting. And this is one of the sanity tests you have to do with all your neural networks. In fact, again, that individual who asked me that question, I don't know how much experience and knowledge he has of neural networks or convolutional neural networks, but you know, if you have many, many, many more unknowns than data, then you can fit not only the model, but also you can fit the noise. Okay. You don't want to fit the noise. You don't want to have a more, your complexity of your theoretical model should not be as more complex than the complexity between the input data and the output. Let me show you what I mean by this. Okay. Let's assume now we have this is our model, how we explain the motorcycle timing trials. The times we get are a combination of a linear function of the offset as well as a quadratic function of the offset. So the unknowns here are A and B. Notice there's no bias term, that's okay. Just trying to illustrate a point. And so the W1s, W2, this is W1, that's W2. And these will determine the elements of the matrix. So at 0, you get 0, 0. At 1, you just simply put a 1 here, and so on. So this will be the new X matrix that relates the, multiplies this guy by the unknowns, A, B, to give you the right-hand side. In general, that's given by this guy. And so my original linear fit of my points, this is the points in which I collected in my field trials. And the best fit line that explains these points to be by this. I didn't make this up, I did this in that line. So the best fit line is that guy that goes through this dashed line. But if I take that set of equations and then do a least squares determination of what the best fit line is, it starts to be much closer to this dashed line than my best fit line associated with the quadratic. There's still some errors. But they've been much reduced. Can I reduce the errors even more, Marco?
Misfit.
Can I find a model that can almost exactly explain my data?
You have to increase increasing the polynomial grade of the polynomial.
So you add a C
When
plus
increasing the
C x
number
cubed.
of,
And how many unknowns are there now? Instead of 2, there's 3. So 3 will probably get extremely close, and certainly 4 will be able to catch everything perfectly. Is that what you want? What you're doing is you're starting to fit the noise with data, and any data that you have in geophysics always has noise in it. The noise could come from measurement noise. The noise could come from the fact that you don't have enough physics in your model matrix. You didn't use the right physics to explain the collected data. So that's going to be noise and so on. So you don't want to fit every wiggle in your curve here. If you do, they call it overfitting. So you don't want your theoretical model to be more complex than the relationship between the input and the output. So the rule of thumb here is don't make the model more complex than the data. And there's a way to test that, and no one does it in reality. It takes too much time. It's something you have to be aware of. What they'll do is they'll go ahead and they'll take their training set. They'll take training set, and the training set consists of what? Consists of inputs and labeled outputs. Like that set of dog pictures I showed the other day. You flatten each dog picture into a vector, and the first one is X soup 1, the second dog picture is X soup 2, and it's labeled as either dog or cat or something. So you get this training set, and it's your and I'll do this with a swivel. Because if you have 100 training examples, you take 90 of them as your training set and 10 of them as your validation set. And you go ahead and find your W's, a matrix of W's, that explain the relationship between that and that. And that's going to be perfect. It's not going to be perfect. You never want it to be perfect. Find your W. You go ahead and do your matrix inverses off this training set. And then you take 10 of your training examples that you left out of this training, and hopefully you did this in a random way. You picked these validation set in a random way out of your original data set that had been labeled. So you have the original labeled data set, and you split it into 2 pieces. 90% of them are training, 10%, and various people will do 70-30 or it's around that ratio. And if you plot up the errors, the prediction errors for this, how do you compute a prediction error for that? Marco? Say you found your W's, and you have a prediction error for that.
You compute the sweet function.
Yeah, the Bisset function, which is x w minus y transpose x multiplied for that. And what error did you get, Marco?
It's If it is a low order polynomial, very large, and
Give me a number. What,
5.
what percent error did you get?
5.
Oh, you got a 5%, so 95% accuracy. And then you did the same thing for this validation data set. And what error did you get? Using the same W's. But they weren't trained. This was out of the training set.
Case over 50 or in general?
What?
80.
80. Oh, your error is 8%, so it's 92% accuracy. So those are close enough to what I'm saying. Yeah, you probably did a decent job. But if you had something like this, 82% versus 95%, what does that say?
It's over 50.
What?
Over 15 case.
No. Well, it could be over 50, yes. Yes. Oh, yeah, okay, good. It could indicate over 50. Because you fit every little, let's go back to this example. You fit every little point here in your data set. Well, if my out of the training data set was taken from the next day, where things are really now dried out, remember that squishy zone that slowed me down? Okay, now it was very hard pancake. I was able to really zoom in a way that's very different than this guy. And I would definitely get some big errors if I use the W's to fit this. It won't allow for that kind of new behavior. So you want to make sure that your validation set encompasses all the potential situations of your data, of your experiment. That is, another example would be you just picked out the mostly dog and cat pictures, picked out very few mice pictures for training here. And these are mostly mice for your validation. So you got to make sure all your data is very well balanced in terms of what you're doing for training. Well, there's a test for, another test for your, we'll get into this more, for your overfitting. And one thing you could do is you can reduce the number of unknowns in your original set of equations that relate x to y. And how do you do that? You have fewer nodes in your neural network. And if you reduce the number of knowns in your neural network, and you still get about the same accuracy, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. And what that suggests is that your complexity of your model doesn't have to be so great. But if you increase the number of unknowns in your data set, or increase the complexity, increase the number of unknowns, increase the complexity of this, you may start getting decrease in your polynomial, your error, but at some point in your validation data set, it starts to zoom up for the reason of you're too complex. When you go past here, when you take your validation data set and the errors really start going crazy, then you have too much complexity built into your model that explains input, data, output. Say back, Marco, what is overfitting of data?
This overfitting of data is when the model it cannot generalize to other data than the one that they use to fit the training set.
How do you fix that problem?
I can take away some unknown and make easier model that can generalize to other data.
Abdul, in the context of neural networks, how do you reduce the complexity of your neural network model?
By removing some of the nodes and see if the model can fit.
And you're going to find out this later. That's called dropout. It's a dropout test. You go ahead and get your answers. Then you try it again, except now you drop out some of the nodes that had been trained before. See if they make a difference. If they don't, that's one way of seeing if things are okay. Okay, in summary, you have an overdetermined system of equations. And what that means is you get a matrix relating the input values such that the matrix taller than it is wider. More equations in the notes. Ill conditioning, in terms of geometry, your misfit function, if you contour it out, starts to be elongated along some of the axes. I'm only showing you two variables here, but these are like thousands of dimensions of these vector W's that you're trying to find. And I'm just showing you two of these guys. So many of these dimensions can have very round geometry associated with misfit, but I'm just showing you the one that is very ill conditioned.